A knight gazes coldly across a divided frame at a weeping young woman, coolly reflecting that this is precisely how it had to be, and that he has finally made it. Cradling the fragile woman gently on the cold stone amid scattered roses, he quietly reveals the destination she truly wanted was her own death. The scene shifts to a weathered narration drifting over the crumbling rooftops of the slums within the kingdom of Silveria. A soothing voice recounts the legend of 5 great spirits sent by God, inherited by the royal family and the 4 ducal houses to bring peace and prosperity to Silveria. A bright-eyed little girl bounces eagerly on the bed, cheerfully begging her mother to read the beloved history one more time. The mother smiles knowingly at her daughter Meltya, fondly teasing that she is an unusual child who prefers dense history books to simple picture books. Meltya inwardly reveals her secret truth, admitting she was once a girl who adored fantasy otome games in a long-lost past life. She calmly explains that in that former existence she was a Japanese student whose life ended abruptly in an accident, only to be reincarnated here in Silveria. Marveling at the medieval streets alive with magic and spirits, Meltya delights that this is the very fantasy world she always dreamed of inhabiting. Snuggling happily against her mother, the reincarnated girl gleefully declares that a history book like this is a priceless lore guide any devoted geek would kill for. The affectionate mother, Clarice, playfully accepts the challenge, warmly bidding her beloved Meltya to be good before slipping away for the evening. Meltya wryly notes her humble station in this life as the daughter of a lowly slum songstress, hinting that her fate holds far greater complications ahead. Meltya muses wryly that she recalls no heroine with such a backstory, concluding she was not reincarnated into any of the beloved otome games she once adored. Watching her mother charm a smiling patron, Meltya proudly notes that Clarice's voice is as wonderful as ever, insisting such talent does not belong in a dump like this. Even so, the determined girl declares with quiet confidence that her true role here is to become an overpowered heroine wielding knowledge from her past life. For the sake of the mother she loves, Meltya vows to drag them both out of rock-bottom poverty by outsmarting even the sharpest adults through trade and clever salon pitches. Everything shifts abruptly when a noble duke, seated beside a radiant Clarice at a moonlit fountain, tenderly confesses his love and begs her to become his wife. Clarice hesitates gently, softly explaining that she has a precious daughter and could not possibly marry him and leave her little girl behind. The Duke reassures her warmly, calmly promising the anxious songstress that she has absolutely nothing in the world to worry about. Embracing them both beneath a shower of light, he declares the 3 of them will live happily together, prompting a stunned Meltya to inwardly shriek that they just unlocked the marry-into-money route. Sitting among wildflowers, Meltya delights that she had merely planned to become a merchant for her mother's sake, yet becoming nobles works out even better. Bounding to her mother's side on the wedding day, the excited girl cheerfully announces she has brought a special present. Clarice beams at the bouquet of humble Lyria wildflowers, warmly assuring her worried daughter that these are her favorite blossoms and she is truly very happy. Pulling her child into a tight, tender embrace, the beautiful bride softly whispers that they will be happy together from now on. Meltya nestles against her joyfully, her eyes shining as she breathlessly agrees with all her heart. The narration sweeps grandly onward, revealing that mother and daughter escaped their life of poverty and were warmly welcomed into the noble ducal family. The scene shifts to a distant range of pale, sunlit mountains as a calm voice flatly declares that it is simply no use. Leaning eagerly over a balcony with a telescope, Meltya frets that she cannot spot the carriage carrying her mother and father anywhere, and a composed steward wryly agrees that of course she cannot. The kindly figure beside her is revealed as the family's dignified household steward, Greif's Donut. Gazing toward the peaks, Greif's patiently explains that the couple should have already reached the neighboring kingdom beyond the mountains, far past the reach of even a magic-powered telescope. A brilliant realization lights Meltya's face as the steward muses that perhaps only wind or light spirits could see so far, and the girl excitedly exclaims that spirits are exactly the answer. Spinning toward Greif's with sparkling eyes, Meltya eagerly asks whether her new father possesses a spirit too, and the steward calmly confirms that of course he does. A magnificent phoenix wreathed in flame blazes to life as Greif's proudly explains that the orphan's ducal family has inherited the majestic, breathtakingly brave spirit of fire for generations. Sparkling with wonder, Meltya eagerly asks whether her father will summon the glorious creature for her once he returns, and the steward falters awkwardly that it is rather difficult. Greif's explains gravely that summoning a spirit places a tremendous burden upon its master, warning that it is not something one should ever do casually. A distant maid flaps urgently toward them as a puzzled Meltya blinks and asks whether that is truly so. The frantic servant bursts onto the balcony in a blaze of motion, crying out to Gryphs that something terrible has happened. Between choked sobs, the maid reveals that a woman has just passed away in the detached house, leaving a bewildered Meltya to breathe a single stunned word. The scene shifts to a lonely cottage in the woods behind the manor as Meltya narrates that she never knew such a place existed. Racing through the halls in mounting dread, the panicked girl cries out to demand what on earth is going on. Meltya insists that her mother and father are away on their honeymoon in the neighboring kingdom, only for the grieving maid to flatly correct her with a single, quiet no. The maid softly reveals that the one who died was a Lady Felina, as Meltya inwardly confesses she had no idea such a person existed. Gazing upon the pale, black-haired woman laid among white flowers, Meltya reels as the truth lands that Felina was the duke's lawful wife, meaning her father already possessed a wife and son. Servants weep around the quiet deathbed as a grim young boy stands in silent vigil and Gryphs murmurs a sorrowful farewell to his fallen lady. Sniffling amid the mournful gloom, a shaken Meltya stares into the middle distance and quietly admits to herself that this is a waking nightmare. Meltya reflects with dawning guilt that she rejoiced when the duke married her mother because she only ever wanted them to be happy, never imagining it would make someone else utterly miserable. Trembling with bitter self-reproach, the disillusioned girl silently condemns her own hopeless naivety. Across the dim room, the grim-faced boy turns slowly toward her, muttering a single wary word of confusion. Their eyes lock in a charged, breathless instant as the startled boy studies her and Meltya's heart lurches with sudden, dawning disbelief. Standing apart against a stark white void, the boy hesitantly begins to address her, his voice trailing on the edge of recognition. Leaning close, the composed boy politely introduces himself with measured grace, coolly declaring it a pleasure to meet her as Meltya breathes his name in astonishment. The dark-haired boy calmly presents himself as Roy von Orphans, evenly expressing his hope that they will get along before addressing the shaken heroine, pointedly, as his new sister. A dawning horror widens Meltya's tear-streaked eyes as a jarring certainty crashes over her and she inwardly cries that she knew it all along. The narration reveals that Roy is a romance option in her beloved otome game, The Princess of Light, whose heroine Alice is a lowly commoner girl who impossibly hosts the royal spirit of light and is swept into a world-shaking conflict. Meltya confesses with quiet fervor that of every character in that game, Roy was always her absolute favorite. She dwells wistfully on his shadowed, sorrowful beauty and the melancholy gaze that first captured her devoted heart. The narration lingers on his ruthless, calculating intelligence, describing a boy coldly willing to employ any means to achieve his ambitions. Yet Meltya reveals the tender prize buried deep within his story, his rare and genuine true smile, hidden far beyond a brutal maze of unforgiving event flags. A grim truck bearing down through the dark marks her final memory as she admits she was utterly obsessed with clearing Roy's route, only to die before ever witnessing its ending. Snapping back to the present, a trembling Meltya stares in dread as Roy quietly calls her sister once more. Piecing together the horror, Meltya realizes with mounting panic that this is the world of Princess of Light and that she has landed squarely in the middle of Roy's route. A cold dread grips her face as the crushing truth assembles itself, that she is now cast as his infamous stepsister. The narration lands the cruel role like a hammer blow, branding Meltya forever as the villainous stepsister of Roy's tragic tale. A younger Meltya sneers down from a lavish couch in a chilling flash of the game's story, coldly branding the boy a creepy little brat. The narration confesses that Roy's backstory is sheer hell, revealing that after his father died suddenly and the spirit inheritance was severed, his stepsister seized his rightful title. It continues that despite her beautiful face, the stepsister harbored a hideous heart, abusing Roy like a slave while squandering the ducal family's wealth on endless pleasures and a harem of grasping men. The tide turns when Roy inherits the spirit at 14 at the risk of his own life, rising as the new duke and banishing his cruel stepsister into ruin. The narration delivers the villainess's grim fate, revealing that in the end she was slaughtered by the very men who had once worshipped her. Jolted from her spiraling dread, Meltya flinches as Roy leans in and evenly asks whether something is wrong, sister. Quaking on unsteady feet, the cornered heroine stammers helplessly, unable to force out a single coherent word. Gryphs suddenly seizes her back in alarm, frantically shouting for Meltya to pull herself together while denouncing the boy as a monster who ensnares people with his evil eye. Trembling with grief and fury, the steward condemns the child as a vile creature, bitterly claiming his own wife was seduced by that thing and killed, as a stunned Meltya can only whisper his name in disbelief. Standing calm before his stricken new family, Roy meets their gazes evenly as Greifs bitterly spits that being cast out here is exactly what the boy deserves. The knight Mars snaps back furiously in his lord's defense, arguing that Greif's own wife brought that fatal accident entirely upon herself, as Meltya identifies the pale strategist beside them as the sharp-eyed Cain. The narration cuts through the shouting with a single, quiet correction, stating plainly that it truly was an accident. The narration explains that Roy's beauty and immense magical power are like nectar to others, marking him since earliest childhood as prey for grasping adults driven by their desires. Revealing the buried tragedy, the narration confesses that Greif's own wife was one such predator, and that Roy fought back desperately until a terrible accident claimed her life. Meltya reflects on the Duke's cowardice, describing an utterly ordinary man who, rather than shielding his gifted son, feared and envied the boy instead. The narration reveals the cruelest truth of the cottage, that the Duke forced both Roy and his lawful wife Felina to live confined within these lonely woods. The scene returns to the present as a hesitant maid softly calls out to Lady Meltya. Blinking in confusion, Meltya asks what she means, and the sorrowful maid quietly wonders aloud what they should now do with her lady's body. Meltya inwardly panics that she knows nothing of noble funeral customs, recalling grimly that in the slums the dead were simply cast into a designated pit and forgotten. The narration confirms the brutal parallel, revealing that the stepsister's own battered body, after her relatives assaulted her, was likewise discarded into a pit. Trembling with dread, Meltya silently confesses she does not want to die and wants desperately to flee this cursed place right now, as the maid gently notes that custom demands Felina rest in the ducal chapel. Meltya's resolve steadies as she inwardly agrees they will do exactly that with the body. Yet her thoughts snag on a deeper fear, admitting that no matter what, she cannot bear to abandon her beloved mother. Greifs erupts in raw fury, roaring that those people have nothing to do with the ducal family and that carrying Felina to the sacred chapel is utterly out of the question, as Meltya realizes his hatred has completely clouded his judgment. Weighing the danger from above, Meltya reasons that provoking the grief-stricken steward carelessly will only make everything messier, yet she cannot allow Felina's body to be treated so cruelly. Steeling her clever mind, Meltya urges herself to think hard, desperately searching for a way to convince the stubborn Greifs to honor proper custom. Meltya cautiously admits to the steward that she has no wish to accept anyone but her own mother as the lawful wife, drawing his wary attention with a quiet call of his name. Pressing her shrewd argument, Meltya insists they were never even told a lawful wife existed and refuses to be branded a usurper, warning that mistreating Felina now will only turn public slander against her mother and herself. Landing her point with cool precision, Meltya instructs the steward that if he truly understands, he must deal with the body at once, respectfully and fully according to custom. You're right, that's 25 paragraphs for 20 images. Here it is trimmed to 1 beat per image. Meltya reminds herself pointedly that none of this is done out of concern for Roy and his mother, only to protect the selfish stepsister's reputation. Greifs lowers his head and murmurs a single heavy word, however, and lets it hang in the air. The word lands like a blade, and Meltya feels her composure crack as she realizes that alone is still not enough. She whirls with a luminous smile and asks brightly whether they are not, after all, merely talking about someone already dead, insisting it does not matter where the body is left. Greifs softens with something like reverence, marveling in a hushed voice at how merciful the young lady is. Meltya answers with sweet obedience that it shall be as he commands, and Greifs invites her warmly to return with him. Everyone's stares cut into her as she walks, and she thinks with quiet resignation that she must look like an arrogant, shameless commoner. Roy watches her from across the room, and Meltya meets his gaze through the parted curtains with measured calm. She reminds herself she is only the mistress's tag-along daughter, nothing more to the ducal family. And yet in the game, she recalls with dread, this same Meltya stole the ducal title outright. Greifs comes running toward the carriage, crying out frantically that something terrible has happened, and Meltya wonders aghast how the girl she is to become could have done it. He arrives breathless and stricken, and Meltya demands to know what has gone wrong now. He doubles over gasping, struggling to force the words out. The Duke and his wife, he begins. The Duke and his wife have been killed in an accident, Greifs finally chokes out, and Meltya recoils in open horror. The scene shifts to the wake, where Clarice lies pale and still, and Meltya cries out for her mother in anguish. Meltya weeps, utterly bewildered, wondering aloud what in the world could possibly have happened this time. A sudden crash of footsteps scatters the mourners as strangers stride boldly into the hall. An unfamiliar nobleman greets Gryphs with oily delight, purring that the report was true and what a terrible tragedy this has become. Meltya freezes and Gryphs turns ashen as he recognizes the intruder and gasps the name Lord Benjamin. Lord Benjamin smiles thinly and admits he has a friend in the border patrol, which made him the very first to receive the news. Benjamin explains smoothly that of course he sent word to the main house and arranged for the bodies to be transported, all because he wished to bring his beloved brother home as soon as possible. Meltya sits apart in numb disbelief as the mourners murmur that it was terrible luck, an accident on the mountain pass, and she quietly insists to herself that no, that is not it at all. She remembers now with dawning dread that Roy's father and stepmother are killed when Roy is 10, that it was murder disguised as an accident, and that the one responsible is Roy's uncle, Benjamin von Curl. Meltya kneels grieving before her mother's coffin and whispers a broken apology for everything. She recalls with aching tenderness that even though a songstress from the slums was treated no better than a prostitute, Clarice stayed pure and innocent and loved her with all her heart. Meltya sobs that if only she had remembered sooner she could have saved her from such a horrible death, and behind her Benjamin coolly calls the gathering to order. Benjamin gestures grandly and announces that their ducal house has lost the master of its spirit, so naturally the spirit was never passed from father to son. He turns to Gryphs and asks whether it is true that his brother also annulled his marriage to his lawful wife Felina, and Gryphs admits heavily that it is. Benjamin observes with silky calm that this would make him first in line to inherit the title, and muses that Roy is not even the legitimate heir. The branch families erupt in agreement, clamoring that every adult of the ducal house has the right to try, that whoever finds and inherits the spirit becomes the duke, and that without a spirit bearer the line of succession means nothing. Benjamin throws back his head with a delighted laugh and urges them merrily not to be so hasty. He reminds them that when the spoken method of succession is lost, magic conceals the spirit somewhere within the territory, and finding it is a grueling trial that can remain hidden for over 10 years. He spreads his hands and asks pointedly whether they can really leave the ducal seat vacant all that time, while beside him a lesser noble sobs an apology. Benjamin smiles and offers his proposal, suggesting they simply appoint a figurehead duke for the time being. He gestures theatrically toward the coffins and reveals that fortunately his brother legally married his new wife, whose daughter is still alive, declaring that girl the person most suited to hold the ducal title for now, and Meltya recoils in stunned horror. The nobles coo that yes, poor Meltya, and Meltya flinches as one of them addresses her directly as Lady Meltya. Benjamin crouches before the trembling girl and croons that without this she will be left with nowhere to go, and that he only wants to save her. He clasps her small hand tightly and murmurs that she understands, doesn't she, while the branch families concede he has a point and propose setting the deadline 4 years out, when the girl comes of age, so that whoever has served the ducal house best may then marry her. Benjamin savors the arrangement, purring that this way the title returns to its rightful owner and he gets a beautiful mistress too. So that, the narrator observes drily, is how it happened. The narrator explains that the relatives must have given up almost immediately, since searching for the spirit is difficult and inheriting it strains even an adult's body, so they chose the easier path of winning over the stepsister. None of them ever dreamed that Roy could inherit the spirit while he was still a child. Benjamin bows low over the trembling girl and implores her to grant them the honor of an audience, and Meltya screams a silent no. They call for her to wait as her heart pounds, and she thinks frantically that she has to run, because of what awaits her. She bolts and comes up short, and there across the empty room stands Roy, watching her in silence. Meltya freezes and asks herself, if she runs away now, what will become of Roy? She recalls that even after being struck from the family register his immense magic and legitimate bloodline remain unchanged, and once he comes of age he will be the most likely person to inherit the spirit. The narrator reveals that there was only one reason they kept him alive, and that seeing Roy treated like a slave was an entertaining little show for the relatives, and Roy weeps in chains with a collar buckled at his throat. Ironically, the narrator observes, it was his stepsister's abuse that kept him alive. Meltya understands with cold clarity that if she runs from her role, they will kill him. And probably she realizes, right away. Benjamin seizes her small hand again as she stares back wide-eyed and stricken. Roy watches her from across the hall, and Meltya bows her head, trembling as the villain clasps her fingers. She hears the memory of Clarice telling her she wants her to live because she loved her so much, and Meltya resolves that she cannot abandon him. Benjamin murmurs her name, And Meltya thinks that even setting those feelings aside, she could never run away and leave such a little boy behind. She lifts a tear-streaked face and apologizes with a wobbling smile, saying she is only embarrassed because she cried so much her face must look awful. Benjamin gushes that not at all, she is beautiful even with tears on her face, and Meltya seethes inwardly that this is no thing to say to a 12-year-old, the creep. She braces herself and thinks with weary resolve that there will be countless moments like this from now on, and that she needs to steel herself. Benjamin sets his hand upon her head and bids everyone greet their new duke, and Meltya steadies herself with the thought that now she remembers the game she can surely handle it, and that it will not be too late to run after that. Morning arrives, and a gentle voice greets the young lady Meltya on a bright new day. Meltya wakes groggily in her canopied bed, murmuring a sleepy good morning, and reflects that she somehow managed to review all her memories last night, including the tangled relationships surrounding the ducal family. First, she tallies, there is herself, the Duchess, and her only ally Gryphs, while below them looms Benjamin, whom she must keep watch on, win over and flatter, trusting the relatives to hold one another in check for now. The real problem, she thinks, is Roy and the others, despised by both Gryphs and the relatives, so to keep anyone from harming them she must place them under her control, treating them harshly enough to satisfy everyone while secretly supporting them behind her ducal authority shield. And of course, she reminds herself, she will prepare to escape the moment Roy inherits the spirit, when a sudden clamor rises from below and startles her. Gryphs turns at the commotion, dabbing his brow, and asks what all the noise is about before spotting her and greeting her warmly. Meltya descends to find the branch families flooding in with luggage, shouting to move it quickly and be careful, one of them brazenly claiming the corner room on the south side, and a maid protesting that they cannot simply do as they please. Benjamin comes striding through the chaos with an armful of flowers, beaming as he asks his young niece how she is feeling. He presents the enormous bouquet, purring that large blossoms suit her perfectly, and Meltya forces out a stiff thank you and insists she is doing very well. Meltya smiles through the overwhelming heap of flowers while thinking privately that they are pretty but far too much, and that she prefers simpler blooms. She remembers with quiet fondness the lyria flowers she once gave her mother, and Benjamin offers an oily apology for all the commotion. Benjamin folds his hands and announces that starting today the branch families will be living here too, insisting they only wish to support their young duchess. Meltya realizes with dawning dread that the spirit is most likely hidden somewhere on the ducal estate, so of course they would all move in. She beams radiantly and thanks her dear uncle while inwardly panicking that this is bad and she needs a plan immediately. Later she summons Gryphs, who answers dutifully that yes, Meltya, he is listening. Gryphs bows as she declares that she is giving him full authority over the ducal family's affairs and orders him pointedly to make sure her uncles do not do whatever they please, and he agrees that it is understood. Almost as an afterthought she asks where Roy and the others are, and Gryphs falters with an uneasy ah. Gryphs reveals that they are still in yesterday's cottage, kept under guard until preparations to dispose of them are complete, and Meltya reels in horror asking what. Meltya bolts upright and cries that they cannot kill them, demanding to know what he is even talking about, while Gryphs stammers in confusion that but. She catches herself and pivots smoothly, folding her arms and declaring with cruel sweetness that it would be a waste to simply kill them, that they will be her personal servants and no one is to touch them without permission, purring that they are such entertaining toys. Meltya jabs a finger and demands whether Gryphs understands, declaring that it is an order from the Duchess. She whirls with fierce resolve and commands him to bring them here at once. The guards fling open the cottage door, lamplight spilling across three waiting figures in the gloom. Roy stands flanked by Cain and the tall knight Mars, the latter lifting a lantern as they squint into the sudden light. Roy regards the unfamiliar corridor with wary calm and asks quietly what this place is. Meltya spins to face them with a dazzling grin, Gryphs wincing behind her, and announces that this is their new room. She laughs that of course it is, sneering that a whole cottage was far too luxurious for low-born scum like them, while Mars explodes that she is a rotten wretch for locking Roy in this miserable windowless room. Behind the cruelty she reminds herself wearily that this is only how she has to make it look so Gryphs will accept it. She notes with cool calculation that they can use the back entrance without passing her room, and that only one passage leads to this chamber. It is the perfect place, she reasons, for Cain and Roy to operate in secret, and it will be easier for Mars to protect Roy from assassins. Meltya props a hand on her hip and purrs with luminous menace that they know they cannot defy her, don't they? Cain watches her, guarded, as she declares coldly that from now on they are her slaves. She orders that they will obey her absolutely and not forget it, and Mars snarls a furious "Yu" through gritted teeth. Roy steps calmly in front of the seething knight and murmurs that it is all right, even as Mars protests his name in disbelief. Cain reasons quietly that given their position, disobeying her order would be treason, and Meltya watches the exchange in tense silence. Roy sinks into a low bow before her and pledges that he will humbly serve her, addressing her as Your Grace. Meltya faces him across the corridor and thinks with aching tenderness that she is sorry, Roy, but to protect his life she will see this through. The two study each other's faces, and Meltya vows to herself that she will play the stepsister, the villainess, to the very end. The scene shifts to a moonlit garden wall, where the maid Elise whispers to Roy that she managed to learn Lady Felina's body was taken to a church on the outskirts of town. She stands with a lantern beside Roy and Mars in the dark woods, a mule waiting nearby, and reports softly that Felina will most likely be buried by tomorrow morning. Roy closes his eyes and murmurs his understanding, then tells them coldly that it is time to go. Mars rides through the woods seething, cursing Meltya's name and swearing that one day he will kill her, while Elise begs him not to act rashly. Mars rounds on Cain and demands to know why none of this seems to bother him in the slightest. He recounts bitterly that the woman promised to have Lady Felina laid to rest in the chapel, then changed her tune entirely the moment the relatives appeared. Cain observes evenly that the former duke and his wife died together, and that laying Felina beside them would be highly unusual. Mars sneers at his composure and calls him a coward, insisting they should kill Meltya for Lord Roy's sake, while Cain answers that they must stay calm for exactly that reason. Cain calls him a muscle-brained idiot, and Mars can only sputter in confusion. He reminds Mars pointedly that they once said becoming a sword saint was within his reach, yet his master cast him out for his recklessness, and that serving Lord Roy was meant to teach him patience. Mars fires back that his master never abandoned him but sent him to find a lord, learn who he is, and return to his training, while Elise dryly notes that should take quite a while and Roy tells them both to be quiet. Roy turns his hooded gaze to Cain and says he wants to hear his assessment of her. Hooves click steadily against the stone as Cain admits that, unpleasant as it is to say it aloud. He concludes that they should keep the woman alive, since as long as she lives Benjamin and the relatives will not lay a hand on Lord Roy. Roy asks quietly whether Cain means to use his sister as a shield, and Mars erupts that there is no need to call scum like her his sister, while Elise concedes she agrees with him on that single point. Cain presses on, noting she told several lies just yesterday. He recalls the tender image of the songstress and her child and reasons that she must have something planned. The scene shifts to the manor, where Greif bows to Lady Meltya as Benjamin declares it time to have his brother and sister-in-law's bodies taken to the chapel. Greif protests, but Benjamin insists that woman cannot be laid to rest beside them, and asks forgiveness now that the Duke and his wife have passed. Roy watches in silence as Elise reports that Lady Meltya asked for Felina's body to be placed in the chapel, and Benjamin feigns shock that the woman died only a short while ago. Benjamin smiles thinly and calls it an amusing joke, reminding Meltya that she knows perfectly well they could never allow such a thing. The relatives erupt in agreement, crowing that an outsider cannot be mourned in their chapel and that her body should simply be thrown into one of the slum's dumping pits, while Meltya stands composed between Roy and a furious Mars. Mars roars that he will never let them do such a thing, and Benjamin only tilts his head with a cold hum of amusement. Benjamin smiles that it is perfect timing, since if they are hauling bodies to the pit anyway, perhaps he should take their heads while he is at it. Elise flings out an arm to shield Roy and cries his name in alarm as the threat lands. Meltya suddenly plants her hands on her hips and demands aghast how they could make such decisions without including her, declaring them all so cruel. Benjamin's hand drifts to his sword hilt as Mars and the others turn toward the childish outburst. Meltya lifts her chin and reminds them that she is the most important person in this house now, her heels striking the floor with a sharp clack. She sweeps her hand wide and proclaims that the orphan's family's wealth and power are all hers, every last bit of it belonging to her alone. Roy watches from beneath his lashes as Meltya presses on, saying that means. Meltya beams with luminous, dangerous delight and announces that anything involving Roy should be hers and hers alone to decide. Benjamin sheathes his blade with a grudging hum and concedes that this much is true. He tells her that of course she is right, then adds however that he cannot agree to her request regarding Felina, while Meltya starts to protest that she did not. Meltya's expression curdles into contempt as she finishes coldly that she has no wish to mourn that woman at all. Mars whirls on her wide-eyed and snarls at her not to screw with them. He jabs a furious finger and insists that Lady Felina was the Duke's rightful wife, far nobler than trash like her, while Meltya sighs that he is so noisy. Meltya turns a lazy, mocking eye toward Roy and asks whether he should not train his dog a little better. Roy calmly extends a hand to hold Mars back and offers his apology for the retainer's disrespect, as Mars sputters his lord's name in disbelief. Meltya crosses her arms and observes flatly that the apology did not sound the least bit sincere. She rests her cheek on her hand with a wicked grin and tells him that if he is truly sorry, he should spin around 3 times and say woof. Mars trembles with rage as Meltya goads him on, telling him to show that dog how it is done, while Roy stands unmoved beside him. Meltya closes her eyes and hums sweetly, promising that if he does it properly, she might just consider doing something about that woman's body after all. Roy's boots step forward across the polished floor with quiet, deliberate weight. Meltya watches sidelong with a curling smile as Roy's feet turn, and his sharp gaze fixes coldly ahead. Meltya stands with her arms crossed at the end of the hall as Roy faces her, lowers his head, and utters a single flat woof. Meltya presses her fingers to her lips and dissolves into delighted, luminous laughter at the sight. The relatives cackle that it serves him right, marveling that someone so pathetic and pitiful was once the ducal heir, and Meltya coos that perhaps she will show him a little mercy. Roy stands composed as Meltya orders Greifs to arrange a suitable church and have that woman's body taken there, and he answers simply that he will. Meltya throws Roy a wicked grin and tells him she will decide what to do with all of them later. Under a pale sky, the 3 ride away through the trees as her voice lingers, warning them to wait quietly until then. Elise frets over Lord Roy as Kane admits that from the very beginning something about the woman's words and actions has felt strange. The riders press on beneath the moonlit canopy while Kane concedes that she is merely a low-born commoner, and he cannot imagine she harbors any grand intentions. Roy fixes him with a level stare and reminds him that even a man with the power to see through lies has his limits. Kane admits they simply do not have enough information to determine her true intentions, and Roy quietly agrees that this is true. The scene shifts beneath a thin crescent moon to a crumbling church on the town's edge, its spire rising into the night as they arrive. The 3 dismount and approach the great doors, a lone donkey tethered in the shadows beside the weathered stone. Mars suddenly hushes the others and warns in a low voice that there is someone already inside. Elise whispers whether it might be a gravedigger, and Roy answers softly that it is not. The door creaks open to reveal a lone hooded figure kneeling among the pews at the far end of the chapel. The figure mutters to itself in relief, grateful it did not have to dig through the filthy burial pits, murmuring that it does not know why the woman was brought to a church but that luck must be on its side. The figure lifts a small glittering object between its fingers and giggles that this is it at last. Mars bursts forward with a furious shout demanding to know what the intruder is doing, and the startled figure shrieks in alarm. Mars freezes with sword raised as the hood falls away, revealing a young girl who turns toward them with wide, tearful eyes, and he stammers in disbelief that it is only a child. Elise gasps that she has got to be kidding while Mars mutters his own denial, the small intruder standing utterly unbothered as the 3 close in. Roy's eyes widen at the sight of the girl, and Elise breathes his name in alarm. The girl protests frantically that she did not steal it, while Mars bellows that she just took that ring and demands she give it back. She admits sheepishly that claiming innocence would technically be a lie, and Mars roars that this will not work on him. She explains, unhurried, that it is an item meant to become hers eventually, so she simply came to collect it a little early, as Roy and the others watch warily. Elise whispers to ask what the girl even means, and Roy answers quietly that he does not know, but she appears to be telling the truth. The girl's gaze drifts to Roy and she coos that he is so scrawny and pitifully adorable, marveling with delight that Lord Roy really is tiny. Mars erupts that she dare not disrespect his lord, and the girl shrieks and whines at him not to yell, calling him such a brute. Elise stiffens, unnerved, and murmurs to wonder how the stranger could possibly know Mars by name. The girl lowers her eyes with a soft, knowing smile and apologizes to Lord Roy, saying they were not supposed to meet yet. She slips the ring from her finger with a quick pluck, remarking that it will be far more useful in her hands, since collecting it was the only reason she came tonight. Bathed in stained glass light, the girl beams brightly and vows that when the time comes she will save him properly, as the heroine. Mars lunges with a shout for her to wait as she bolts toward the doorway. Roy grabs his shoulder and demands to know why, aghast, protesting that the ring was Lady Felina's keepsake. The door hangs open on the moonlit night as Roy reflects that her whole manner made it seem the ring already belonged to her, and that she implied they would meet again. Elise frets that the girl's use of the word useful troubles her too, and asks whether that ring carries some special history, while Roy answers that it does not. The plain wooden band turns in the light as Roy explains that it should be nothing more than a simple carved ring, and that all he knows is his mother inherited it from his grandmother. Roy presses a hand to his chest and admits that in any case he still cannot fully control his magic, so they cannot risk an unexpected accident, as Mars grudgingly relents. Mars seizes the sword and drives its blade down against the stone in furious frustration, cursing again and again as the weapon shatters into splintered fragments. Mars trembles with fury and cries that he cannot stand this anymore, that every last one of them keeps mocking Lady Felina and Lord Roy. Roy turns his head toward Ellie's, his expression cold and composed as ever. Beneath the arching windows Roy vows quietly that of course he will not let this stand, promising that one day he will make them all pay. Mars flings up a fist and swears of course as Roy tells him evenly that until the time comes he must devote himself to honing his skills. Meltya glances back over her shoulder with a faint, unreadable smile as Roy adds coldly that, as for his sister, no one is to lay a hand on her. Roy faces Ellie squarely and says they will only grow more hostile toward her father from now on, then asks whether Kane can follow him without hesitation. Ellie's levels a flat stare and answers that she gave up on the Duke long ago. Roy kneels before the stained glass light and presses his hands together, whispering for his mother to please rest in peace. The scene shifts outside beneath a slender crescent moon, where Meltya stands alone gazing up at the night sky. Meltya murmurs that the road ahead will be difficult, calling softly to Kane and Mars from the balustrade above. Roy declares that they have 4 years at most before the succession, and that before then he will find the spirit ahead of anyone else. Meltya lifts her gaze skyward and quietly resolves to take everything back. Under drifting motes of light Meltya folds her hands and asks them all to please endure it alongside her, as Roy and the others kneel below. The scene shifts to a flower-framed morning as Roy, dressed in a servant's uniform, greets Meltya brightly with a good morning, sister. Meltya freezes stiff and glowing at the sight, her mind erupting that it is an absolute victory, the elegance still oozing out amid too much sheer cuteness. Meltya's composure cracks into a flustered, delighted grin as she stammers for something to say. She recovers enough to remark that the servant's uniform suits Roy perfectly, and he bows that he is honored by her praise. Meltya insists loftily that he should be grateful, since she could have dressed him in rags but gave him something decent so he would not disgrace her. Roy lowers his eyes with the faintest edge and murmurs that in that case. He asks with dry, pointed innocence whether the maid constantly running her hands over him while dressing him was also part of his sister's brilliant plan. The maid Ellie shrieks in alarm as Meltya's face erupts into a wide-eyed, teary demand of what exactly is going on here. Kane calmly reminds them all that assassination is not the only danger Roy faces, since perverts bewitched by his allure have always hunted his body too. Ellie's frantically insists that she would never, while Meltya coyly presses that the maid seems awfully interested in that boy. Roy watches in flat disbelief as Meltya suggests interest in such a creepy child, the maid protesting there is no way. Meltya leans in with narrowed eyes and warns that if Ellie's is fond of him she might one day plot to make him duke, adding pointedly that she is very sensitive to signs of betrayal. Out of the darkness Meltya delivers the verdict coldly, telling the maid that she does not trust her and that she is fired. Ellie's collapses in tears as Mars restrains her, both crying out for Lady Meltya to please forgive them. Meltya glances back with wicked satisfaction at the maid being dragged away begging for mercy, purring that if Ellie's truly meant to stop she must really have been doing it, as Roy quietly calls her sister. The scene softens as Roy looks up at Meltya with an unexpectedly gentle smile and thanks her sincerely for helping him. Meltya panics internally that this is very bad indeed, snapping aloud that she is no idiot and demanding to know why on earth he would thank her. Meltya spreads her arms and laughs that someone who could have become his ally was just driven away, mocking how laughably optimistic he remains. She hurls a heavy coin purse to the floor and snaps that she has had enough of this pointless chatter. Roy regards her evenly as she orders him to pick that up. Meltya informs him with breezy authority that there are some things she needs him to buy in town, leaving Ellie's gaping in confusion. Meltya cheerfully rattles off her list of a quill and several notebooks and sweets for her tutor Reiner, then appoints Kane and Mars as the guards. She clenches her fist and warns them to understand that the things they are protecting are the goods and the purchase, so if anything happens they must abandon Roy and protect the valuables. Mars recoils aghast, and a furious voice snarls that like hell they will, you damn brat. Roy answers with quiet composure that he will make sure they understand, as Mars points at him in horror crying out for Lord Roy. Roy hefts the purse and observes coolly that this amount of money seems excessive for such errands. Meltya presses her hands to her cheeks and beams that of course it isn't, insisting she calculated everything perfectly. Roy accepts the errand with a measured, understood. Then Meltya imperiously commands the maid to do her nails and barks at the others to hurry up and go since she is busy. Roy's voice announces flatly from beyond the great doors that they will be going. Meltya steals one last sidelong glance at the departing group, then closes her eyes in silence. The moment they are gone, she throws an arm over her face and trembles, leaving the bewildered maid to wonder what has come over her. Meltya breathes to herself with quiet relief that this should do for now. Coins scatter luminous through the dark as she reasons that Cain will almost certainly find a way to funnel some of that gold into savings. The scene shifts to the game's memory, where the stepsister and the relatives' extravagance nearly bankrupts the ducal family, leaving Roy struggling with money even after reclaiming his title. Meltya recalls how the lost succession dragged the royal family, the nobles, and even the Princess of Light into a ruthless power struggle. She remembers Cain as the cunning strategist at Roy's side, and how even across every other heroine's route Roy remained impossibly charming. He was sometimes a little devil and seemingly cold-hearted, waltzing one moment and drawing a blade the next, only for him to suddenly reveal a sorrowful expression that undid every reader who saw it. Honestly, Meltya admits, he completely stole the spotlight from everyone else in the entire game. In popularity poll and route difficulty alike he took a glorious first place, though as for Roy's actual route her memory grows uneasy. The scene shifts to a sunlit garden, where a soft voice asks the Princess of Light why on earth she is so determined to trust him. Roy tells her plainly that he did not approach her out of love or romance, and that surely she has already realized as much. He confesses coldly that he could kill her at any time. He presses a blade near and murmurs that if necessary he could do it right now, and Meltya notes grimly that this is as far as her memories go. Meltya's expression falls as she admits she really did want to see how that ending played out. She reassures herself that even if struggling for money is part of the original storyline, having some savings tucked away should still help. She watches the three small figures vanish into the misty distance and resolves that she will need to keep creating chances like this one. Meltya plans that Roy and Cain can sort out the money while she sends Mars off to the stables, since as for that simple-minded knight, she smugly predicts he probably won't notice a thing, just as Mars, out in the cold, erupts into a violent sneeze. Night deepens as Meltya paces her bedroom floor in her nightgown, fretting that they are late. She presses a hand to her mouth and worries anxiously that surely nothing has gone wrong out there. Roy's voice arrives at last through the door, asking her to forgive them for returning so late. He holds out the parcels and reports evenly that they have brought all the items she requested, Cain and Mars behind him. Meltya masks her relief with a haughty scolding that they took long enough and demands to know how anyone could be so slow, while Mars fumes that she is the one who ordered the stable hand not to lend them horses. Meltya freezes mid-boast with a startled, guilty, huh. Roy watches quietly as she looks away, murmuring that she never actually said any such thing. The narrator notes that Roy and the others walked the whole way to town and back, a distance even adults would take a carriage to cross, which for children raised as nobles must have been brutal. Roy smiles faintly and tells her not to concern herself, insisting he has a fair amount of stamina, as Meltya begins a stricken con. She wheels around laughing that she is not concerned in the slightest and that it all went according to plan, gleefully declaring it serves him right and promising he will cry himself to sleep clutching his aching feet. Roy only regards her with a soft, knowing smile that makes her falter. He shifts awkwardly and mentions that there is one more thing, producing something from beneath his cloak and offering that this is for her. He holds out a small bunch of white flowers, explaining it is to thank her for this morning, for protecting him from that maid. Meltya flushes and stammers frantically that protecting him was not at all what she was doing. Roy admits he couldn't bring himself to spend her money buying her a gift, so he is sorry they are only wildflowers gathered along the road. He beams at her with luminous sincerity and asks her to please accept them, and for a moment Meltya is utterly aghast. She snatches the flowers away in a flustered panic as Roy blinks in surprise. Meltya clutches the little bouquet and covers her fluster with contempt, sneering aloud what shabby flowers these are. Meltya hurls the little bouquet to the floor and spits with false disgust that she wouldn't even want to touch these, while Mars gapes in fury and Roy watches in silence. She flings out an imperious hand and demands to know whether he is finished here, then orders him coldly to hurry up and leave. Roy holds her gaze for a long, unreadable moment and says nothing at all. He turns and walks away, And only once the three of them have gone does Meltya sink to her knees at the door beside the scattered flowers. Her composure cracks as she stares down at the crumpled wildflowers, something raw and uncertain flickering across her face. Unseen from around the corner, Roy pauses and glances back at the small figure kneeling to gather every fallen bloom. The scene shifts to a bright morning as Meltya greets her tutor with delight, a dignified older gentleman announced as Lord Reiner arriving for her lesson. Reiner bows and offers his deepest condolences to Lady Meltya, and she reflects warmly that he is the tutor her father hired, a wonderful teacher far too knowledgeable and thoughtful for someone like her. Meltya beams that for her parents' sake she will study even harder, and asks him gently to please keep calling her Meltya just as before. Reiner softens and answers quietly that he understands. The lesson is interrupted as Roy opens the door, carrying in a case of supplies with Mars and Ellie's close behind. Meltya scolds him theatrically that he is far too slow and snaps at him to hurry and carry it all in, while Reiner watches with mild surprise. Reiner leans close and asks in a low voice whether those particular people could possibly be who he suspects, and Meltya stiffens. She waves it off breezily, insisting they are merely servants and that he should pay them no mind, as Roy silently sets down the load and Reiner murmurs that he sees. Meltya spins back around with a bright hop and declares that more importantly, they should begin the lesson at once. Reiner proposes they continue with the rules of spelling, and Meltya immediately cuts in with a firm, "No, teacher." She raises a finger and boasts that she can already read and write almost perfectly, insisting they study something far more advanced like economics or political science. Reiner startles in astonishment at the notion that she can already read and write, and Meltya proudly claims she worked hard and taught herself. She reflects privately that once her past life memories returned she grasped reading and writing almost instantly, her mind apparently reverted to how it was when she was around 20. Meltya's smile sharpens with resolve as she reminds herself that she is the Duchess now and needs to become much smarter, very fast. Meltya proudly gestures to the desk and shows off a fine new notebook meant just for reviewing and preparing her lessons. Reiner marvels that it is an excellent method as she explains she will use it to track how much she understands and adjust the pace of her studies accordingly. She then rounds on Roy with a bright cruelty, calling his name and offering that he may stand in the corner and watch. Meltya leans in with a wicked, flushed grin and declares that the education he was meant to receive, and everything else besides, now belongs entirely to her. Roy takes his place against the wall as she cheerfully announces to her tutor that they shall now begin. Kane and Mars quietly position themselves nearby, murmuring that they will remain with him as well, and Roy answers softly that all right, that is fine. The lesson unfolds in earnest, Reiner gesturing at a map while Meltya writes diligently at her desk under the watchful eyes at the door. Roy studies her from across the room and thinks to himself that she really is strange. He reasons that making him stand here may look like an insult, but it is probably her roundabout way of granting him an education, concluding that everything she does somehow helps him indirectly. Roy narrows his eyes at the quiet girl, the gift of supplies and the saved coins and the flowers all turning in his mind, and wonders just what exactly she is trying to accomplish.